Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from the CUNY TV Foundation, Capital One Bank, Genova Burns, Gian Tomasi and Webster, New York Community Bank, the Witkoff Group, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, Colliers International NYC, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Union Funding, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors LLC, Herrick Feinstein LLP, Hersha Hospitality Trust, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides Centurion Holdings, Margolin Weiner and Evans LLP, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, People's United Bank, RBS Citizens Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, Urban American, and These Friends.
So, everybody wants to be a builder. They want to develop. They want to, they want to produce. They want to do things. So the kids from Brooklyn, they go to law school. They work for the DA. Then they decide building in Manhattan. And they say, I'll put a supermarket in the building and other things. And then subsequently they say, Vegas, Florida, and back to New York. But today I have a very interesting individual, the eminent Ian Bruce Eichner. Thanks for being here today.
Michael, so nice of you to have me.
You have an interesting parent situation. Your mother was married to this gentleman who was not an Eichner, okay? And your mother met him, and he was in World War II, right?
Yes.
So tell me about it.
So my mother married her high school sweetheart in the Bronx. And then World War II came, and he wound up serving the United States government in North Africa. And my mother received the telegram saying, we regret to inform you that your husband was killed in action. And then we were happy to inform you that he's only missing in action. And ultimately, it turned up that he was blown out of a tank and then ran off with the nurse.
Okay, but at least part of the good part was that you were born.
It's a good thing.
Okay. Now, you told me that your mother's father was an entrepreneur. He had some interesting, he had luncheonettes, candy stores.
Yeah, my grandfather, may he rest in peace, Nathan Wolf Cooper, who was really kind of my dad. And I look up and I say, I kind of miss my grandfather at least once a week. And Nathan he was a Russian immigrant and basically owned a series of bankrupt luncheonettes that he would run. He was in the canned goods business. He was trying to export lima beans to South America. He was
an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
Okay, and he let you once in a while work in the lunch.
He always let me work.
Okay. Later on in your life, your mother meets Mr. Eichner, right?
Actually, my mother was fixed up by her cousin with Hermann Eichner, who was
from Austria.
Born in Austria, spoke the King's English, quite proper.
And he's a professor. He was the man who really started the undergraduate program at the New School for Social Research.
That is correct.
But you were living in Brooklyn at this time, your mother and father.
No, actually, when she married Eichner,
Was Sunnyside?
We lived initially across the street in the brownstone from the new school. This is before the Landmarks Preservation Commission existed. A developer bought the building,
What a criminal person, a developer.
tore the building down, and so we relocated to Sunnyside, Queens, to the corner of 39th Avenue and 46th Street.
Now, being an entrepreneur as a child, tell me about the brick business and the wheelbarrows. I think if I didn't tell this story, I would be remiss.
So I was always interested in making money, which really vexed my father quite a bit. And the way Sunnyside was organized, there were attached townhouses around a common garden. And the cars, the vehicles, the garages were across the street. And a developer came along and bought a string of the garages to build the first apartment building in the neighborhood. And I saw this as an opportunity.
You what, 12 years of age?
12, somewhere between 11 and 12. I ran around the neighborhood and I rented from each of my friends wheelbarrows that they had, that they used for gardening, and everybody had a little garden in the back. And I piled up all the wheelbarrows outside. And my father said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I have an idea." He said, "Is it going to interfere with your schoolwork?" And I said, "Hopefully." And he said, "That's not the answer that I was hoping to receive." So I went across the street with a hammer and chisel, knocked the mortar off the bricks because the garages were made out of brick. I had the only transportation in the neighborhood because I had the wheelbarrows. And I went around selling bricks for brick gardens. And at the end of a couple of weeks, there was a minimum order of 100 bricks, and I made $900, which represented about 10% of what my father made in a year.
And Mr. Eichner, your dad, was a little...
He was underwhelmed. He didn't speak to me for 3 months.
Yeah, tell me about some of the other jobs when you were growing up.
Well, I worked in a steel mill for Republic Steel when I was in college. I worked for Sears Roebuck as a management trainee. I worked for my mother, who had an employment agency. I worked in restaurants.
Now, growing up, you also, you went to public school, you graduated high school, and, you decided that for some unknown reason, you were going to go to Stuyvesant High School.
I decided to take the exam, and in an era, they accepted me, when it was all boys.
It was an error.
It was an era.
Okay, so you go to Stuyvesant, and you excelled to the level of my own category, the lowest level in the class, right?
Actually, I didn't show my true colors until law school.
After Stuyvesant, you then decide that you want to get as far away from New York as possible, and you end up in Albuquerque, New Mexico?
Yes, my freshman year of college, I went to the University of New Mexico. I took a train 30 some odd hours and wound up in downtown Albuquerque in September of 1962.
And one of the interesting things is when you met the first person who said to you what? Your roommate or what?
There was a guy from a small town in New Mexico who wound up, he lived across the hall from me. And I gathered that he found out that I was Jewish. And my door's open, and his name was Lanny. And Lanny's standing in the doorway for 15 minutes, and he's just not moving. I look up and I said, "Lanny, can I help you?" And he said, "I've never seen a Jewish person before." So, I was a little bit, didn't quite know what to say.
So 1 year in New Mexico, so from the weather in New Mexico, you decided to go to Tonawanda, New York, to the University of Buffalo.
I did.
Okay, and you graduated University of Buffalo. How did you decide that you wanted to go to the University of Cincinnati to go to law school?
So I thought I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. And I made again, I was trying to violate my goal was not New York. Anything but not New York, because I wanted to avoid family issues. So I made a list of law schools in the Midwest because my grades were always the same. I did just enough to get to the next level. So I did just enough in law school to get, in college, to get myself into a law school, but not a really good law school. So I cast about, and I discovered that the dean of the law school in Cincinnati had written the casebook in criminal law. And so I decided to go to the University of Cincinnati, where I thought I would learn something about being a criminal lawyer.
So you're there, and you had the distinction of doing very well at Cincinnati. As you said, when you met with the dean a couple of years ago, you ended up bottom in your class.
Unfortunately, I showed my true colors, and I graduated, as I like to refer to, as the anchor man in the class.
Okay, so the anchor man who graduates over here, how do you get to work for the DA's office?
Well, the DA's office actually was willing to take people who were essentially working for nothing. There was no promise of a job, but you hoped that you'd intern there. And at the time, it was the end of my second year. I wasn't officially last in my class. I was merely in the bottom quarter of the class. So I had theoretically another year to improve.
And then what's the next job when you came back?
So I worked for the then extremely distinguished district attorney of New York County, Frank Hogan. Mr. Hogan had, among other things, a 4-year commitment. I didn't want to make a 4-year commitment and probably wouldn't have been accepted there anyway because my grades weren't adequate. And he recommended that I go to Brooklyn, where there was a new district attorney that was trying to turn...
That was Gold.
Eugene Gold. And they offered me a job on the spot because I'd worked and gotten a nice recommendation from Hogan's office. And so I wind up in June of 1969 accepting a job as an assistant district attorney in downtown Brooklyn, which I knew nothing about.
Then decided, because you were always an entrepreneur, that you were going to, a building, you found a building, right? From Mrs. Fitzpatrick or something?
Yeah, I've always wanted to do something in business. And the only business that I could think of that I could learn while holding a full-time job was the real estate business, because you could do it at night and during the weekend. And I actually shared an office with a guy that lived in the Park Slope section of Brooklyn. So in 1969, I find myself in the Park Slope section of Brooklyn, and I was immediately captivated. It reminded me of the Village, where Herman Eichner had, where I'd grown up when I was a kid, and I thought, this is an opportunity to do something. Problem was, I had no money. And so I found a woman, Mrs. Fitzpatrick, who lived at number 39 Montgomery Place. And she owned a building across the street at number 40. So I spent 4 months with Mrs. Fitzpatrick every Friday afternoon, Saturday, having tea, holding her while she brushed her dog's teeth, and wound up buying 40 Montgomery Place.
And she took a mortgage back, right?
She took the mortgage back.
But you didn't have enough money, so you found we'll call them, we don't want to say, but we will call it a Shylock.
A hard money lender.
Who lent you money to renovate the building.
Yes.
Okay. And you did rather well in that building, right?
I did very well in that building.
Okay. So what happens next?
So then I started buying rental buildings in Park Slope on 7th Street, all between 8th and Prospect Park West. And then I bought a building on 8th Avenue to convert to co-op. And then I thought to myself, you're ready now to graduate to the bigger time.
Now wait, was that when you made that big check?
No.
Okay, not yet.
I was making nice sized checks that were substantially...
More than you were doing as a lawyer.
Actually what happened was, after the DA's office, I went to work for a gubernatorial agency. So from 1971 to 1975, I worked for the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, which actually, in a lot of ways, helped me because it enabled me to get a better understanding
of how to get things through the system.
Correct.
So tell me, after the building, you're ready to the big building, the next building.
So I decide that I'm going to go to Brooklyn Heights, and I find an empty hotel.
What was it called? The Margette?
No, before the Hotel Margaret was something called the Franklin Arms.
Right.
It's a 20-unit project, and I finished it in about 1975, 6. And out of that project, I wrote a check to myself for slightly over $1 million. And that's how it really started.
Right. And then you try to do the Margette, right?
The Margaret Hotel.
Okay. Tell me about the Margaret Hotel, because it has such experience in your life of how to deal with bureaucracy.
So the Margaret Hotel was filled with tenants. It was an SRO, single room occupancy. And it took me about 8 months to empty this 50 some odd tenants. It was consisted of 3 buildings, two buildings on Columbia Heights and another building on the back of it on Orange Street. I went through a 1.5-year renovation, finished the building. All of the apartments were sold and the money was in escrow. And the night after we closed the permanent loan, the plumber had drained the standpipe system because he was afraid that it was freezing. And the tile guy was just finished grouting the tiles, and he had a standing burner. And the burner fell over, the building went on fire, it was wooden timbers, and it burned to the ground.
And
2 days and 2 nights.
And you had sold the building, or you had sold all the apartments?
Sold all the apartments.
And you owed Citibank some money? Or?
I owed, actually it was Flushing Savings Bank had a $3 million mortgage. The insurance was $3 million because I hadn't figured out about insuring things for the value as completed. So I wound up with nothing.
So, but then you said, hey, I'm going to figure this out. And what do? You try to get this rezoned, right? And you deal with the Brooklyn Heights Association and a variety of others.
So what I did was first I went back because I had a hardship. And I went to city planning and I went through an arduous procedure to have the building, because I was in a 50-foot height limit, to have, based on the fire, a hardship to get a new building approved. I get the building through city planning, through the Landmarks Preservation Commission, through meaning approved. It goes to the city council, but the neighborhood didn't want the building. So they lobbied with the city council, and the city council rejected the application. So I then was in this conundrum. I was forced to sue the city of New York, took what's called an Article 78 procedure, and took it all the way to the Court of Appeals, the highest court that we had. In each step of the way, the courts ruled unanimously in my favor. So 3 years later, I wind up getting the building approved totally.
And then you sold the property to the Jehovah's Witnesses.
I did.
Okay. So then it was time to elevate yourself. But you met a guy, right, who said, it's time for Bruce to leave Brooklyn to come to Manhattan, right? And
Michael, it's interesting. I think in everybody's life,
is somebody who could be a
be
mentor or lucky.
You have to have some element of either mentorship or good fortune. And my good fortune, I met a guy named Ron Altman. And Ron, I'm going to guess Ron's probably 80 some odd. And Ron had 3 very important clients. And one of his clients was a guy named Victor Smorgon, who was the patriarch of the largest privately held family in Melbourne, something called Smorgon Consolidated Industries. And Victor, because Ron basically said, he's a smart kid, he basically invested the first $4 million with me to build my first high-rise on the corner of First Avenue and 70th Street.
You're 36 years of age now, right?
Yes.
And you decide that this was an interesting thing. You said, let me make smaller apartments downstairs and larger apartments upstairs, right?
Yeah, I did. One of the things that helped me, because it's always sort of the same story. The good news is I don't know anything. The bad news is I don't know anything. So I started out and I looked at the way buildings were built, and I realized that everything was built in a line of studios, a line of ones, a line of twos. And the reason that was done is because the plumbing stacks up, and it's cheaper to run the kitchens on top of one another and the bathrooms on top of one another. But they were building rental buildings. And I saw an opportunity because the city didn't have condominiums.
Right, because all of the Upper East Side were really converted cooperative buildings. There were rental buildings that were converted, especially in that neighborhood, and that was a great success.
Right. So I saw an opportunity to sell because foreigners had trouble getting approved by co-ops. Corporations couldn't buy co-ops. There were much stricter rules in terms of rentals with co-ops, and I saw an opportunity to build a condominium. And so I did two things that were unusual in the first building. The first was I actually did a market study and ascertained that people who wanted a two-bedroom did not want a two-bedroom on the 5th floor. So I developed the building by having 3 tiers. The bottom tier having the smallest apartments, the middle tier having middle-sized apartments, and the most luxurious apartments at the top of the building. The other thing that I did, which had never been done before, was I built the lobby first. Why? Because there was none of the technology that existed now, and people wanted to see what their lobby would look like. That, and I built on the 20th floor 3 model apartments showing what a 1-bedroom, what a 2-bedroom, and a larger unit would look like. That just had never been done before.
Then, after that was a success, you built the Royale.
Yes.
Okay, the Royale was a couple of blocks, was on 3rd Avenue, went up from 1st to 3rd. And over there, you really did something very interesting, which people didn't realize. You said, let's put a little space for retail, and let's put the supermarket downstairs. And that's when the Food Emporium opened up on 3rd Avenue, being the first creative market, and you did a condo over there. Then you got involved with the Boulevard on 86th Street. But then Eichner said, you know, I fought and I did a little zoning and I like air, and you decide to build City Spire. 80 stories?
Yes. It was at the time.
But the partner from Melbourne at this time said, Bruce, this was a little too much?
No.
Oh,
Smorgan was my partner in all of these buildings.
I didn't know he was the partner in City Spire.
When I came to the first major office building, 1540 Broadway,
right,
that's when Victor said, when the equity check was $50 million, he said to me, Bruce, it's either this or a steel mill. I'm not going to...
Steel mill, I know, okay. So City Spire was a unique thing because it's a very unique building. It's on 56th Street, 55th, 56th Street, between 6th Avenue and 7th Avenue. And the lower level were offices, and the upper level was condominiums.
Yes.
Okay? Magnificent building. But when you built that, you also decided to, hey, it was a little recession was coming on, and you decided to build 1540 Broadway, which became subsequently the Bertelsmann Building.
Correct.
And this is before, Times Square was Times Square. You went into Times Square when the Squeegee Men was in Times Square, when people would say, who wanted to go to Times Square? This was, they were early in Times Square, and, as one would say, both deals worked out, but they were learning experiences. These learning experiences, even though they were tough learning experiences, you go in and you go back to Brooklyn, to your roots. So what happens to 180 Montague Street?
So I see an opportunity, and again, my business requires, it's helpful if you have some vision. And one of the things that I recognized about Brooklyn Heights is that because it's a landmark district, there hasn't been a new rental built in that neighborhood since 1965. But there was one block on Montague Street that was excluded because it was a commercial street. So I went and I bought a 50-foot wide building and ran up and down the block buying everybody's air rights.
And you built over there 180 Montague, which was a great success, a great rental, and which subsequently is sold to Archstone.
Yes.
Okay. Then you said, hey, look, maybe it's something that Jewish kids should do. They got to go to Florida, okay? And you end up in South Beach, and over there you build what, the first Cosmopolitan?
Actually, what I built in South Beach was on the old racetrack.
Right.
It was the city racetrack, and it was supposed to be, the intent was that casino gaming was going to be approved in Florida, once again, and Steve Wynn had actually a contract to build a casino there if the gaming was approved. Needless to say, gaming was crushed in Florida.
Right.
And then I built the Continuum on South Beach, which was the last two high-rises on the beach.
Then you went to build the Cosmopolitan in Vegas, a $3 billion development.
$4 billion.
A $4 billion development, which has opened, and a lot of the great things have happened in that. And then Bruce comes back and forget Florida, forget Vegas. It's time to come back to New York. And in New York, you're back and you're active, and you're building on 125th Street and Park Avenue, 2 residential towers.
First 2 luxury buildings ever built in Harlem.
And then you're also going to be building a very large, 80-story building?
Yes.
80-story building right in the Madison Square Park neighborhood on 22nd Street, which will be fantastic. Tell me about your kids.
I have 2 lovely girls. Be careful what you wish for. Alexandra and Lindsay. The elder child works for Corcoran Sunshine. The younger child works for a fitness company called Beachbody. They are 18 months apart, and I love them dearly.
And Mom is where today?
Mom is in New York. We work together. We've worked together for most of the last 20 years. She's an inordinately creative marketing person, and we're working on both projects together.
So you look at this and you say, hey, many people in the real estate business say they haven't seen the ups and downs. You've seen the ups and downs, and you've really made a mark in New York, in Florida, and Vegas, and I'm certain that when these 2 next projects come to fruition, they will be definitely a mark, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me.